Well, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everybody. This is Harry Brailsford with SMB Nation. So it's lunch out on the West Coast, including Las Vegas, where our guest is today. Then it's mid-afternoon over on the East Coast. It's evening over in Europe. We have attendees. And then, God bless them, and over in Asia and Australia, it's morning. Thank you for getting up early to join us. Totally appreciate it. Let us know how tomorrow looks. With that said, we'll get to the topic in just a moment. I want to, as always, do a little bit of housekeeping. Use the questions feature to ask your questions. And we're going to get to by the way, we're going to handle it a little bit different today. We're going to have a couple of discrete periods to ask and answer your questions. One will be after the midpoint break. Speaking of which, we are underwritten and sponsored by Fortinet. So totally appreciate that. They are getting deeper and deeper and deeper into our community in the security conversation. And their respect is well earned. So we're going to hear from them today. In terms of coming up, some activities, tomorrow's the third quarter analyst report. So check your inbox for the Q3 analyst report tomorrow at noon, Thursday, noon Pacific. Then right now, I am attending the Smartsheet conference in Bellevue, Washington. That's kind of cool. Smartsheet is kind of a project management based system that's starting to morph into being more of an enterprise resource management type system. More on that later. I'll be blogging it in the Sunday paper coming out in just a few days. I just confirmed I'll be at Continuum in early October in Las Vegas. Then I'm off to Spiceworks for several days in Austin, Texas. Then it's Channel Pro in New Jersey in early November. So lots of ways to interact. And by the way, totally appreciate a few people walked up last Wednesday, a week ago, down in Long Beach for the Channel Pro event. A few people walked up and we had some good dialogue. With that said, we better get going. We have a lot going on. This is the MSP Tech Talk series. It's proven to be a very popular format. And this is fall semester. So we have longtime friend of the family, Jamison West. Jamison, let's just take a second before we jump into your presentation in terms of running a business and being a cloud service provider and so on. I'll let you introduce your topic best, but let's just back up for the audience that doesn't know you. That you and I met in we met in the early days of SMB Nation, and you've been able to really capitalize that into growing and selling a real business, and now you're off to another venture. Jamison, take the talking stick for a second, then we'll jump into the good stuff.
Yeah, sure. Currently I'm the CEO of Teamatics. Harry, you and I met, I believe it was 2006, if I'm not mistaken. I was just kind of thinking about maybe hiring somebody and growing my little time and materials IT shop, and kind of moving from a lifestyle business to making a real go at it. And over the 21 years that I owned my IT company, I went through pretty much every iteration, from the one-man band to kind of a growing T&M shop, full managed services. Did 4 acquisitions to get up to about 40 staff.
Yeah, boy howdy.
It was busy. It was busy. And those acquisitions happened in 23 months. So,
oh man.
And right in the middle of those acquisitions, also rebranded from JWCS to Arterian. So we spent some pretty good change and really focused on our brand and our future. And then we really, we kind of struggled in our last acquisition. So we really focused on narrowing down our vision to cloud and getting also highly profitable. So we reduced our staff size, we grew our client base, and we just really focused on that pure play cloud managed services, cloud solution provider, really very, very focused with Microsoft in the early early iterations of CSP. If I'm not mistaken, I was either the first or second Ingram Micro CSP, indirect CSP, and then I shifted to direct CSP with Microsoft as soon as they opened that up. So I went through all those iterations, and then ultimately sold the business in the beginning of 2016. Spent about a year really working closely with Aldridge, who's the company who acquired, as part of their leadership team, kind of helping them integrate and learn about cloud. I kind of became their cloud champion, and then ultimately left it in their capable hands and decided to just go into cloud consulting and semi-retirement in Las Vegas and move down here. But then another opportunity came up, and being the serial entrepreneur that I am, restaurants, real estate, you name it, I was approached by an old colleague, and we founded Teamatics, which is another conversation. But suffice it to say, on Teamatics, what's kind of exciting for me is, in my M&A world, I was very passionate about people and culture, and I was obviously, clearly very focused on the cloud, and I've kind of brought those two together. So now I have a human capital software as a service company that I'm running, and that's a lot of fun and really, really enjoying it. So.
Cool. And boy, you kept them spellbound at the Small Business Server User Group meeting in Bellevue, Washington. For those not in the area, Seattle, Bellevue, Redmond. Jamison, I was going to say that was winter. Was that February or January? And then you moved.
Yeah, it was sudden. It was sudden. We made the decision in about a 24-hour time frame. I looked at my wife and she said, "I want out. The weather's bad." And she has family down here, and the kids are in middle school. She's like, "This is it. If we don't do it now, we're not moving them in high school." So we did it.
Yeah. All right, my friend, let's jump into it. We've got a great audience. Let's jump into it. Rock and roar.
All right, absolutely. Well, you know, what I really wanted to get into today was understanding why we're thinking about the cloud, why we're talking about the cloud, what the options are to think about the transformation and strategy of an IT services business, whether it be in time and materials project or primarily focused on primary managed service provider business. What does this look like to shift toward cloud? How do you have to think about your business? And prescriptively, what are the steps that I need to take to get there? But before we jump into actually, the conversation, I'd love to better understand the audience out here. So we have some poll questions. I believe those are going to come up for you in a moment.
Yeah, we have the capable Jennifer Hallmark, as always, over in the radio control room. There we are. Jamison, I'll quickly read it, but it is on the screen. Where on this spectrum do you see yourself as an IT provider? Number 1, time and materials. 2, mix of T&M and MSP. 3, pure MSP. 4, mix of MSP and CSP, cloud solution provider. And then finally, pure CSP. So, folks, if you could go ahead and answer that. And Jamison, just to level set, you are in Las Vegas today. I know your travel schedule's sometimes aggressive, but you're actually down in Vegas today?
I am enjoying it. It's a nice, comfortable 87 degrees, and just looking out my window and enjoying the weather. So, but
there we go.
There's definitely some conferences coming up, and I've got some travel on the horizon. I always do.
Yes, sir. Okay, Jenny, that's sufficient time. If you can close the poll, and I'll read the results. Okay. The question was, where on the spectrum do you see yourself as an IT provider? Jamison, 9% time and materials, just under 10%. A very large answer, a mix of time and materials and MSP. That I would expect, 38%. Pure MSP, 0. Interesting. Mix of MSP and CSP, 52%. That's actually surprising to me as an analyst, and pleasantly surprising. And then finally, pure CSP, 2%. Jamison, what say you?
No, that's I'm very pleasantly surprised by that. I guess what I shouldn't be surprised when I say a mix. I very, very rarely people put themselves squarely in one category. Not too surprised to see nobody say pure play MSP without a little T&M or a little cloud stuff mixed in. So in retrospect, the zero there kind of makes sense. But yeah, it's interesting, very, very balanced. Some people are just approaching that pure play MSP, and some people have kind of moved into the cloud, and that was split audience there. So good, helpful, thank you. And do we have a next poll question coming up?
Okay, Jenny in the control room. All right, I'll go ahead and read it. Are you a Microsoft CSP, either direct or indirect? The answer is yes or no. So, Jamison, probably not enough time to do storytelling and giggles. That's an easy one to answer, folks. Yes or no?
Yep.
Jenny, if you see the answers rolling in over there in the other room, if you're ready to display the results, I'll leave it up to you. And we'll give people just a couple more seconds to do that.
Yeah, they're still rolling in.
Oh, they are. Okay,
Yep.
No problem. And we'll let that do that. There we go. Okay. Are you a Microsoft CSP direct or indirect? Jamison, the results are yes at 74%, no at 26%. That's, I love polls. I'm constantly educated by polls, so 3/4 yes.
Great, great. I think we have a couple more.
Okay, and here we go. And the question is, have you fully sold and implemented Azure AD without traditional AD for a client? We have 3 choices. No. Number 2, for some of my clients. And number 3, for all of my clients. And we'll let people think that one through. Boy, Jamison, I remember, what was that, Cindy Bates small business gathering, was that 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago, November? Remember that you and I were kind of some of the only partners there, and she had customer media, the woman from CNBC, I forget her name. We had Ramon Ray. We had Anita Campbell. Was that 3 years ago? And you sat me down and drew circles and squares about Azure AD.
Well, you know, there were telltale signs then of where Microsoft was headed, and we'll talk about that more for certain.
Okay.
It's been very interesting.
Yep, Jamison, I got the results. Have you fully sold and implemented Azure AD without traditional AD for a client? Almost 80%. It's 78% no, 22% for some of my clients, and 0 for all of my clients. There we be. Jamison, are there any more poll questions?
I believe there was one more.
Okay. And I'll read it. Do you include significant business value services for your clients included in your monthly fees? Please select one, yes or no. I want to comment on that, okay, for a second while people are deciding, because Jamison, I've rode this horse for 20 some odd years about the marriage of business and technology. I mean, that's always been my shtick, right? I got one foot in business and one foot in technology. The MVPs can out MVP me, and the big time CEOs can out CEO me, but Jamison, I like to think I can do a little of both. And part of that is, maybe you resemble that, but part of that is that the business value services is the ability to get along with people and some of the soft skills. That's a whole nother conversation.
Absolutely.
I just patting myself on the back. I take pride in that. But the results are up, and the question was, do you include significant business value services for your clients included in your monthly fees? Pleasantly, 78% yes, 22% no. Jamison,
okay,
the people have spoken, the vote's in.
Well, that's great. I appreciate it. It is really helpful for me to get an idea of who the audience is, kind of what we're going to, it allows me to kind of drive the conversation a little bit. So I appreciate everybody's filling those out. It's interesting as I reflect a little bit on those. We talked about the spectrum. CSP, not surprising, about 3/4. We expect that to climb through most Microsoft partners, as always. Azure AD, not surprised at all, and hopefully at the end of this conversation there'll be some real thought about that third question in Azure AD. It really is a big part of the driver of the conversation. And then business value services, I really want people to hopefully come away at the end of this conversation with some idea around what is the value they're driving to their clients, and how does that shift when we move to the cloud. So thank you for your time on that. It's very helpful information to gather. So what is the shift? Cloud-first purchasing is now the norm, and I always, I've been a member of multiple peer groups over the last decade, and resoundingly, I've heard that, yeah, you're in Seattle, so it doesn't apply here. Eventually, after about 4 or 5 years of hearing that from people, they started going, oh, it does apply here. It just applies there first. And what was interesting is it allowed me to really test the waters with clients who are kind of driving technology maybe a little more rapidly than a lot of the other towns and cities around the nation or around the world. And what we've found, particularly of late, is that significant numbers of clients, particularly new startup businesses, have no interest in buying a server. So we're starting to understand how do we address that. That goes to the second point. They're opting against premises infrastructure. So that's more than just the server. It's literally premises infrastructure. We see more and more folks wanting to invest on mobility, access from everywhere, security, and more of this is coming through software, where people are left if they're centrally locating folks with a firewall and wireless, and that's about it. A firewall, wireless, and maybe a switch, and that's about it. Very, very little premise-based infrastructure, as outsourcing and mobility is becoming the norm. Cloud spend, 2015, it bumped to $67 billion. Sorry, that's it says 2010. It's supposed to say 2018 now.
Oh, okay. I thought we had a little Back to the Future, and
we have a little typo, is what we have.
Well, that's fine. I got called out by Vince Betancourt on that. Vince, thanks for the eagle eye. Jamison, you can't get away with it. Please read it properly.
Yeah, at least I read it. I did read it properly. So now what I could probably do is go in and edit it and redisplay it, and nobody knows the difference. 67 billion 2015, 162 billion next year, 2018. So the growth is 19% per annum. It's excessive, and we haven't seen growth like this in infrastructure. I like to say, in the 21 years I've been in the business, and I've seen certainly shifts in terms of business model and how technologies were pulling us around, and we've dabbled in cloud technologies in the past. But really thinking about an infrastructure, the lack of premise-based infrastructure is the biggest shift I ever saw in my business. So we really put some thought into how we dealt with it. The drivers for these decisions from a customer perspective, it's really OpEx versus CapEx. This idea of everything shifting to a subscription model. So certainly it's been there for a long time, right? In some way, shape, or form, there's pieces, parts that people have done for SaaS for a very, very long time. It might have started with maybe you had hosted email or spam services. Even if you had premise-based email, you had some outsourced spam provider that you were routing. That is a true software as a service cloud-based play that you were paying a subscription for. However, it's gone from just utility pieces that surround your premise-based infrastructure to the core of the infrastructure. Clearly Office 365 and then on top of that Azure, which we'll spend some time talking about, Google Cloud, AWS, and Dropbox and Box and all of these other things that are starting to really address a new way of adopting infrastructure coming into play. So people want that scalability without investing in the infrastructure. They want to be able to turn services on or off, and they want to be able to do it in a budgetable OpEx fashion. I know exactly what my spend is per employee, whether I have 50 employees today or 100 employees tomorrow. I can scale it up or down instead of risking a large capital investment and then having a downturn and having unused capacity that I've already prepaid for. less risk of obsolescence. Microsoft, Amazon, Google, that I always talk about those three as the primary players. They're motivated and moving every day to keep everything current, and we don't have to do that for them. So it's beautiful. And then kind of a Microsoft quote, Satya Nadella says it all the time. It's resonated with me since the first time I heard it out of his mouth. Anywhere, anytime, any device. That's become more true than ever. We'll hit on this in the conversation, but it's that idea that that expectation of a decade ago that everybody was sitting at a desktop in an office. Those days have changed, and we all know it. People are, expected to be able to sit on their yacht on their iPad and get their work done. You've got that client who's on vacation, is out doing something and needs to have everything work like they're sitting in the office. But when we have to address it, not only from availability and uptime, they want to address it securely. We have to do all of this other work and really be addressing those needs in a different way. So what can we do? I really see two paths for IT service providers when they think about their future of their business. And I toyed with both of these seriously before I really selected one. So option one, you can shift to just pure-based cloud infrastructure. Just resell cloud infrastructure and scale that business. There's some issues there. It is highly competitive with much bigger players that have a lot of money. You are playing in a very commoditized space, and the margins are very low. So this is the piece that has been a conversation as people talked about cloud. I've heard IT providers be, very, very concerned about the reduction of margins from Microsoft, and I'd argue that that's actually not true. If we sit and explore the math, happy to have that conversation. Regardless, if that's the only money you're bringing in and not service money, your margins are significantly reduced, and there's not a lot of room for service money in that option one, scalable infrastructure. As an example, I have a friend, I won't mention his name, who chose that model. It has been highly successful. He went from a few thousand seats to over 100,000 seats, and he charges $2 a user a month for managed services against Office 365. So I couldn't compete with that. I had no interest in a $2 a month per user model. But that's where we're starting to see these larger commoditized players to go. And before I scare anybody with that conversation, it's something to be aware of, because if we're not thinking about number two, then we've got to figure out how we're going to do number one, because one of these two are inevitable. I think, the vast majority, virtually all but one, of the IT providers I've worked with are far more interested in number two, which is understanding how they can retain the types of businesses and customers that they have today, but fully shift to the cloud, maintain the value proposition, maintain the margins. And I think it's fully possible, but it's something that we really need to consider how we're going to do it. And what's involved is shifting to a cloud-based infrastructure, which is very commoditized, and a dramatic reduction in your cost and a tremendous increase in margins temporarily, very, very temporarily, and we have to replace that value that we used to deliver, which was fairly low value, maintenance of servers and troubleshooting, with more business value. So it becomes more sticky, it becomes relationship-based, we can maintain those revenue and margin levels. What we tend to see is kind of a phase one, phase two approach. So if you just stop at phase one, then you've got to scale mightily. But what we tend to see providers want to do is shift to phase two, maintain their revenue and margin, but they need to now provide a different level of value to avoid becoming a commodity in this ecosystem that we see today.
Yeah. Jamison, if you don't mind, on number two, first of all, and forgive me, are there other options on your next slide before I?
No, I am very pointed on those. To the other, I'll give you what I think the third option is, Harry, without putting it up on the slide. The third option is pretend that this isn't coming and discover in a few years that you're scrambling, because we just see too many folks not recognizing that one of these two is the future. And if there's anything I'm out here to deliver today, I hope to deliver today, is that you've got to understand these two options. You got to pick one and you got to move.
Thank you, and yeah, we call that probably the go fishing option. Just time to hang it up and go fishing. But
Yeah.
option number two, quickly, and before you know it, Jamison, we're at the bottom of the hour. Time flies when we're having fun. But on option number two, so as I made mention at the beginning of the show today, I'm at the Smartsheet conference in Bellevue, Washington. Smartsheet started as a project management cloud-based solution. That's what they're best known for, but they're very quickly becoming a workflow product. And that's business value, Jamison. I mean, as you get your head into, be it SharePoint, be it Smartsheet, that's real work. And at the party last night at the Chihuly Glass Museum, I spoke with a lady who's a contractor slash consultant, doing real good work on a contract basis for Alaska Airlines. And so Jamison, a little bit different than our MSP crowd, but the shoe still fits, that she's adding business value in addition to the technology. Please proceed, Jamison. I just
I think that's a perfect point, and I think the business workflow is actually a discrete bullet that I have later in the slide as it speaks to business value. So you've hit the nail on the head there about not just being, I mean, when we talk about business value, when I talk about business value, I want to really specifically say I spent over 15 years where when I reflect on it, it was absolutely requiring my clients to hire me, but what I was to them was an infrastructure vendor, not a business partner. And you kind of move from the infrastructure vendor space to a business partner. You deliver value that has high ROI for that client, and that's that relationship change. It's not just relationship based, but that's the thing that creates stickiness in the margins and the revenues that you can maintain. And we're at that time. That's probably between slides a good time to take the midpoint break, and
Sure.
Then I'll jump into more depth after.
Sure, and I think you'll do the keystrokes, was my understanding.
Yep.
I'll absolutely do the intro. Jamison, if you want to start to cue that up. So folks, because of the generous support of Fortinet, and they are very active in becoming top of mind as a security vendor in the SMB space, the MSP community, that's what makes this possible, the fall semester. So appreciate, while you're filling up your coffee to the left, appreciate if you would watch a video we put together. It's a partner spotlight that I filmed with the team down there a couple of months ago, and appreciate your support. That's what makes it all happen. Jamison, when you're ready, sir, then I'll comment on Fortinet at the other side, and maybe we can got a couple questions lined up. Folks, use the questions feature to ask your questions. Jamison, go for it. Oh, and folks, you will Let's see.
All right,
Sanity check. Jenny? Jamison? Okay. Jamison, can you hear me?
I can hear you perfectly.
Okay, thank you, sir. When I said housekeeping, Jamison, I meant it literally. I just let Astro out. So, literally. Jamison, we have a poll question, and I'm going to read it. Folks, if you could take a second to reply, it's, do you offer security services and products as a significant part of your business? 3 answers, yes, no, and I do not know. And while you're taking a second to answer that, we have some questions queued up, thank you. And a couple of people, including Yuli out in Maui, always a pleasure to have him on board. Yuli, we're going to get you the link to that video. For some reason, Jamison, it's a long way out to Maui, so not quite sure what happened with the video
the
replay.
Didn't make it?
Yeah. So, Yuli, totally appreciate your participation as always, and we'll get that we'll get that link in the thank you note. So, Jenny, go ahead and close the poll if you feel the timing's right. We had a yes, no, and I don't know. And then we're back. So, Jamison, let's do let me do some housekeeping. Folks, be sure to use the questions feature, which I'm monitoring on screen number 2 to ask your questions. And then once again, tomorrow we have the third quarter analyst report, so it's a double dip this week. Then I'm off to Continuum, Spiceworks, Channel Pro. And Jamison, just as an aside, where can people see you in the next month or two? Quickly, what shows will you be at?
So I am doing 3 different things. I've been kind of talking about exactly the content I'm doing here and a little bit about the human capital side as well at Chartech Academy. So I've been the kind of featured keynote for all of 2017 there around the cloud. They've kind of refocused on cloud, and I'm driving that content. Also, I am doing a tremendous amount of stuff at IT Nation. I'll be a busy guy there. For those of you who are ConnectWise partners, I've been kind of a staple there for the last 10 years. So I both will have a booth from the Teamatic side doing a lot of human capital work, but then doing this talk or forms of this talk both in panels and through sessions as well. And then I've got a couple of HR technology conferences that have probably not a lot of interest to this to this audience. So other traveling. I'm wearing 2 hats today. So yeah.
All right, let's jump into it. I got a handful of questions, folks. I promised you about this time we would jump into it. So I have Marcia Eckert asking, and it's hang in there. It's a little bit long, but it's a super question. So she says, if you take the activities of an in-house infrastructure, so OS maintenance, ancillary server management, software and performance and analysis, virus backup, SQL, spinning up VMs, etc., where does the responsibility lie? Really need to know, here we go, really need to know how much server management the indirect CSP is responsible for. And she says, thank you. So management responsibilities for an indirect CSP, Jamison.
So I feel strongly that I could answer each of those separate products separately. When we talk about infrastructure management of an endpoint, and by that, I think traditionally our responsibility was the firewall, the server, and the Windows devices, desktops and laptops, right? And I think what's evolving is in a cloud-based infrastructure, we no longer have responsibility for server-type infrastructure. That's gone. We have responsibility for the software as a service that's being delivered through a vendor, although we're just as always, I always like to say, it's funny being an IT service provider. We support software we didn't write on hardware we didn't build, right? So that's kind of the nature of the beast. And here the hardware we didn't build part's going away with the exception of the endpoints. So the servers, that's just gone. It's going purely to a software-based platform But we're going to talk a little bit about identity and security and some of those pieces that we do have to own long term.
Okay, very cool. Then we have, okay, here we go. Here it is. We had Ed Hyde saying couldn't see the video, then could see it. And again, folks, we're going to get you the link to the video, so just to check off on that. Then we have Todd Koopman. Todd asked, what are the most common business value services you see the MSP community offering? He goes on to say, which ones do you think are most valued by the client, and which services are missing? Love the question. Jamison, I love business. This is a business question. So what are the highest value business services the MSP community is offering?
Definitely something that I'll talk about more as we get in kind of the second half here. But okay. I do, we see a lot of work being done around BI and workflow. So BI and workflow are two of the most obvious places we can step in and help. However, we also, there's a couple of different areas based on whether it's internal expertise, in-house expertise that you have, or if it's a vertical orientation around your client. So we've seen IT service providers take over the application support for the handful of apps they do across all of their architecture clients and say, we're just going to completely focus 100% on this vertical and deliver a level of value that nobody can sell against us in our market. That's really powerful when you talk about vertical line of business apps, particularly when we get into cloud. The other direction, for me, we were able to deliver. I was fortunate enough to have some seriously talented business folks on my staff as I went through my acquisitions. I had a couple. I hired a COO and I acquired through an acquisition. One of the owners was just an incredible COO type guy. And we were able to deliver business consulting way beyond technology as a VCIO, but literally sitting on the leadership team. And I think that I could talk for hours, I won't, about the difference between an account manager and a VCIO. We throw the word VCIO around and pretty much put traditional account managers, we label them as VCIOs, but to truly deliver strategic level business services is super powerful to a company that doesn't share the insights that you have. For me, human capital was my thing. I actually worked with my clients to help them think about org design. I helped with mergers and acquisitions and how they would approach it from how technology could help the business better understand mergers and acquisitions, because God knows I've been through that, right? So we did some pretty interesting things to find ways. We just said, what do we actually know? What are we really good at? And then we go look at our clients and we discover it. I'll just shorten it when I get to the same topic at the slide, but I want to finish this answers. I find it really interesting. Something that we tend to be really good at, and we have a lot of in our world, is we have a lot of business intelligence dashboards and the like. You walked into I could have a client. I used to be really proud. I'd bring a client into my office and I'd have these 70-inch monitors around with KPIs on tickets and CSAT from Smileback and all this cool stuff on my walls. And then I'd realize my clients are going, hey, we don't have any of that, and you're our IT company. Well, heck, that is exactly, we looked inward and we had incredible talent on our teams to do SQL analysis, business intelligence, Power BI work through Microsoft, and create dashboards for our clients that blew them away. It was sitting there, it was just ripe as ever. But how do you get there and how do you charge for it? What does that business look like is what I'm going to hit in the second half here.
Very cool. And then the last question for this round would be, let's see, David Anderson, friend of the family. So, hi, Harry and Jamison. He makes a suggestion, Jamison. He says, please provide examples and suggestions for offering significant business value to clients, which I think that's where we're headed. I can answer the question, Jamison. I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, and I kind of just did a little bit touch on it. I think Todd's question was similar in the sense that we want to definitely talk about that. But I'll expand a little bit more as we jump in to the next phase. I'm gonna spend a little time kind of talking through, I mentioned the two options, and regardless of which option you chose, they both started with understanding and moving towards cloud infrastructure. Option one was staying there and scaling dramatically and commoditizing yourself. Option two was adding value so you could maintain your revenue and margins. I just wanted to remind everybody of that. And let's talk about what that first phase looks like regardless of the option you choose. I want to iterate that it's really important. Shifting existing clients to 100% cloud is definitely where we start, but it's not going to be done wholesale overnight with all of your clients at the same time. By no way am I suggesting that. I think that there's a process we need to use to identify where to start, how ready are we, how ready are they. There are a lot of conversations around moving a client to cloud. I think the next thing is once we're ready to do cloud infrastructure, and I've had this conversation multiple times when I've done similar presentations, I've had people say, well, we're selling managed services today, and then we know that we want to move them to the cloud. So let's just sell what we're doing today, and then we'll sell them a project to move to the cloud, and then we'll revisit pricing for cloud-based services once we've done the project. And my issue there is you just told me 3 times that you're going to have to sell the client. And what we found out really quickly is that once we really understood and grasped what cloud infrastructure was and how good we could be at it, and we entered the conversation starting with the goal instead of starting with step 1 and saying we'll talk about the goal after we get there, is we totally differentiated ourselves in the market, and sales happened more rapidly and with the right clients because they were the ones who were ready to go with us and be part of our future. So getting to the point where you're comfortable enough with the process of assessing and migrating to cloud infrastructure and then understand what you're delivering afterwards, when you map that out, sell that. Sell the assessment and the project to get on the cloud and the recurring revenue that it's going to be once you've finished. Start with the end game. Tremendous internal cost reduction. When you do this well, cloud infrastructure well, you rarely, if ever, have engineers visiting clients on person. There's no more screwdriver turning, right? It's done. So from a cost reduction perspective, your network and infrastructure engineers, it becomes an issue, right? I mean, this is something you're going to have to think about. We didn't have a need for network and infrastructure engineers anymore. Now, we had to have somebody who was skilled up enough in the network side to be able to understand the firewall, wireless, and be able to potentially VPN back into Azure if there was some type of host that we had there, or do some type of networking work. But without any type of server infrastructure on premises anymore, or traditional infrastructure in general, or VPNs, those were, we removed the vast majority of that type of infrastructure. And we didn't need infrastructure engineers or network, no more server engineers, no more network engineers. So what happened is we maintained our revenues and our margins spiked tremendously. I don't have a chart to show it, but let's say we were doing 50% margin and 20% of our revenue was going towards that network and senior level engineer, and we didn't need that anymore. All of a sudden we're doing 70, 75, 80 points margin on managed services. Well, that's really great, but it's also very low value, and it isn't going to last unless you do something to provide value. Because my buddy who does Office 365 for $2 a month is going to swoop in there, and the client's going to go, what am I paying you $100 or $150 or $200 a user for? And you're not going to have an answer. So I think that moving people, understanding what cloud infrastructure is, embracing it, shifting people there, that's great. If you plan to scale, if you plan on moving from 1,000 seats to 100,000 seats, if you feel like you have that sales capability and you want to live in that low-value, commoditized world, more power to you. It's a highly competitive market. Your prices will come down to very, very small, low margin, and you've got to scale it to be successful. Assuming that that's probably not where the folks on the call want to go. It's ultimately, I definitely did that dance, and I was seriously considering that. I think I was in a position to be moderately successful there. I I already had clients that I thought I could deliver tremendous value to, and I had strong revenues, and I decided to just deliver different things to them and move from being an infrastructure vendor to a business partner. So what does that look like? And I want to spend a little time here. I'm not an engineer, but I play one on TV. My background is business school, not technical. For the first few years of my company, I was the only employee, and for a long time I was even probably the most senior guy, but I'm very self-taught. So if I miss somewhere technically, I apologize. If there's questions that you guys have that I'll be honest and tell you if I don't know the answers. But I do understand enough to have dove in very deeply. And from my perspective, my vision is that traditional Active Directory is dead. I think there's a reason that we don't hear it in that exact language out of Microsoft, and it makes perfect sense. Because they can't say that to their upper mid-market and enterprise customers today. They're not. We know that Dynamics GP is, gone. We know that Azure AD's iterations from a version perspective are not being built anymore as we focus on Azure AD. And we've seen in the SMB markets, and for me that really went up to the 500 user space, that the vast majority of clients who are willing to embrace it can really move away from traditional Active Directory. And we're seeing that broadly. What I also want to be really specific about in this conversation is when I talk about cloud computing, I'm not talking about lifting the existing servers you have as VMs into somebody else's data center and not changing the version of anything. I'm talking about eliminating servers, including VMs. Not 100% attainable for all clients, but we're getting there very, very rapidly. Moving a server to a VM outside the office is not modern cloud. It's simply saying, I'm remotely accessing the same thing that was sitting in my office yesterday. That is not, to me, cloud computing. That is just taking advantage of distributed infrastructure. What we see is a transition to software as a service. We need to learn what that means, and that really starts with, and I don't say this in front of customers, but I'm happy to say it in front of all you. These words I think I did say it once in front of a customer and bit my lip. He who owns the customer's identity wins. We have built our businesses, and I spent 21 years in my business, or 20 of those 21 years, managing traditional infrastructure, meaning premise-based Active Directory. Meaning, at the end of the day, I was the one, or my company was the one, controlling identification and authentication of my clients to their network and their data, period. No matter what other application or vendors or whatever happened, as long as they were my client, and I was the one managing Active Directory, then that was under my purvey. And at the end of the day, that was the root of everything. I was in charge of making sure that users could authenticate and access what they needed to access. At the end of the day, that's kind of what we do, right?
Jamison.
Jump in. Yes, sir.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I always like to be a wiseacre, just to keep it light and fun. But I will tell you this: I understand that era, and that's when I always like to joke. I'm getting better every day, Jamison, losing a little weight, doing some fitness. But in that era is when I was gaining weight, and I used to joke when you're kind of the 911 and at that really low level, I told people, man, I had to work really hard to get a body like this, right? The sitting in the server room and eating snacks, that's hard work, brother.
Yeah, I've been there. I hear you. It's really interesting as it's changed, this idea that we've scaled to the point where we no longer need to do that work. I mean, you and I both, remember Microsoft announcing the end of Small Business Server and the conversations that blew up of pros and cons on both ends, and I was heavily needle to the 100%, this is inevitable and it's the best thing ever, but that's just because that's where my brain was at. Even though I loved it in its day, I felt it was losing its relevance. And now this traditional infrastructure, Small Business Server or not, this is just the second part of the same conversation. which is ultimately when you are in Office 365, and probably most of the folks on the call already know this, but if you have a mailbox or an account in Office 365, you do have Azure Active Directory. You are managing some of your authentication is happening there. It depends on which piece you're authenticating to, and you can use Azure AD Connect to synchronize your premise-based traditional Active Directory to Azure Active Directory. And there's some pieces that you have to manage on premise, but there's a lot of pieces that you can manage in the cloud. There's also, through Enterprise Mobility plus Security, which we always sold with Office 365 and is now part of the new Microsoft 365, a lot of extensibility to Azure Active Directory, like single sign-on, multi-factor authentication, encryption, everything that you see on the slide. All of this stuff came into, became an offering from a security perspective, from all of this world of things that we could do that we never could do with premise-based infrastructure. We could never do it with traditional infrastructure. And a major piece of what I'll layer into that I didn't write there, but I should have just created a separate bullet, I'll just say it now, is this is massive, and it is also one of those business value add pieces. It's part of what we did in Azure Active Directory. Let me ask the audience, they're not going to be able to answer, but I'm just going to ask it in theory, knowing what the answer probably is. How many of you are doing a wonderful job managing all the devices your customer used to access their data? And in all likelihood, you're doing a pretty good job of managing their Windows 7 and Windows 10 devices. And you're likely not doing a great job managing their Androids and iPads. And all of you would likely admit that the vast majority of your clients are using their iPads, iPhones, and Android phones to do corporate email, to probably do a lot more than that with SaaS applications, Dropbox, SharePoint, this whole world that we live in, that's SaaS distributed applications. And another big piece that we talked about, and we did successfully with Azure AD, was using tools to do mobile device management and really think of an endpoint as an endpoint regardless of what it was. Now we can do a bit more with Windows 10 Pro and Enterprise operating systems, just like you'd expect from Microsoft, where they can actually join Azure AD from the device, and that allows much more ease of authentication and access from those devices once you've authenticated. What we discovered was as Azure AD matured and as the endpoint management, now called Intune, which is part of the EMS infrastructure and security suite, became more robust and comprehensive, we started to reflect on what the heck were we doing with premise-based AD. And it'll be interesting to see some of the questions that start to come in. But group policy objects, we'd hear a little bit here and there, maybe some folder redirection. Really quickly, we could answer those questions through SaaS-based applications, and we started testing with our clients, especially the clients who were pushing us first. And being in Seattle, maybe we had the luxury of a little more of that, but we would go to these customers that were pushing us and say, hey, let's do it. Let's get rid of that server. And we didn't mean let's virtualize the server and throw it in the cloud. We meant let's do an assessment of your infrastructure and do roll off everything we can that's available today in a SaaS-based application. So, of course, Office 365, any line of business app they might have been running locally that could move to SaaS. We did that migration or worked with a vendor. And we'd whittle it down to all that was really left was file sharing, print sharing, and AD. File sharing, we'd make a determination if Microsoft or Dropbox was the better solution. We'd do that migration. We pretty much focused on OneDrive and SharePoint now that it's as powerful as it is. We like being a Microsoft shop and not having a secondary expense. Print sharing was kind of the anomaly. It was always a tough one to address, but there are solutions out there, and people are printing a lot less than they used to. And then finally it was AD. And what we ended up doing was pushing the power button on the server and saying, there, we just migrated your AD. You're no longer authenticating. I'm oversimplifying. We did have to go to the users. We had to run ProfWiz on the users' computers, and because they had to join Azure AD, so we did have to do a little work. But at the end of the day, the migration was making sure that Azure AD Connect was synced everything up, and then basically turn off that synchronization and power off the server, and we were done. So we explored that with multiple clients, ourselves included, and we had a highly successful, it was a highly successful endeavor. As a matter of fact, I'll give an example. I talked to you, Harry, a little bit. I gave a story about mergers and acquisitions and kind of helping clients work through this. I had a perfect opportunity. It was a perfect example of phase one. I had a client, a prospect, I should say, call me, and they were in upstate, they were up in Massachusetts. I'm in Seattle, and what I realized is all of a sudden when I moved into cloud, I no longer had geographical borders like I did when I was a pure play MSP, which was beautiful because I could sell anywhere. And they said, look, we have this issue where we have 150 employees over maybe 5 locations, and we have bought these 30-person companies, and we're buying more as fast as we can, but we're really challenged because we're creating trusts between the domains. We're trying to move everybody in the same email system, but people inevitably have different file systems, and we've got these trusts set up. It's just a nightmare. And I said, what line of business applications are you using? And every one that they were using, there was a SaaS-based solution to, except for one tiny one. And I said, how about we spend the next 2 months moving everything into software as a service and turning off all the servers? And they said, can you do it? Could you do it? There's 150 users remotely, 30 people each in 5 different locations. And in 2 months, we'd moved them all to Office 365, their files to SharePoint. We powered off all the servers. They were all in a single Azure AD domain. And their acquisitions moved from being a 3 to 4 month, $150,000 endeavor to a 3-week pay our Tyrion 20 grand. And we migrated all the data and email to Office 365 SharePoint platform and then powered off their server. That's the future of where this is going. Expect it, be ready for it. There was no IT service provider in their world, in their geography, who even began to approach them with a solution to them. And their work, by the way, they moved dirt. That was literally what their company did, was moved dirt. Not exactly a high-tech business. And we won that account, and it was probably one of my proudest cloud accomplishments. It perfectly highlighted the story and built upon the vision of where we were headed. So I'll probably get some questions around the technology behind that. I'll do my best to answer them at the end when we get there. But I did want to hit on the kind of what phase 2 is, and I want to spend some time here. There were a couple questions earlier here. We talked about it.
Hey, Jamison?
Yeah.
Forgive me, but just to interject, what is your pleasure? I think I have 2 questions queued up, not very many. It's 1:05 Pacific. Why don't we continue? Folks, if you could use a question feature to queue up those questions. And Jamison, how much longer is your core content? And I'm assuming we'll leave sufficient time for questions.
Yeah, my core content's 5 to 10 minutes max. Okay. I'll jump through this, and then it'll probably be easier to jump into questions, because I think I'll get questions on it when I get there. I've answered some of the slides.
I agree. And Bill Holt, we'll get to you. We have a couple queued up. Jamison, please continue. I'll go back on mute.
Okay, perfect. So phase 1. So phase 1, and by the way, when I say phase 1, moving to cloud, it's not as simple as I gave you some of the technical elements. There's obviously a lot to it. How fast can you do it? How prepared are your people? And then deciding how you're going to tackle your client base. So we identified which clients were the low-hanging fruit. They were either super simple, they were pure SaaS players, no reason for them to serve anyway, or the ones who were pushing our button saying, where our server warranty is expiring, we don't want another one, figure it out. And then eventually we got to the ones that were a little more traditional and that we had to push, but we told them this was inevitable and we were not going to allow them to buy another server. So once we kind of get to that point that we have our clients now purely in the cloud, I talked earlier about this issue where we now have really high margins. I got really profitable for a while. Scary, though. As much as you want to watch having too short of margins, I think it's just as important to watch me have too high of margins. If your margins are 80% in this world, you're not delivering enough value, and eventually your clients are going to catch on. The smart ones will anyway. That's what leads us to phase 2. If you decide not to commoditize and you want to drive value to those same clients, What do you do? For us, it was those top two. We had an incredible skill set around delivering true strategic VCIO level services. Our largest client actually had an internal IT team, and they reported to our outsourced CIO, who then reported back to the CEO. So when I say we injected strategic business level value, we literally spent 2 days a week for that client on premises as part of their strategic leadership team. We did project level work at that level, but what we tried to do, and what was really critical to adding these value add services that I want to be really clear about, is we delivered them as part of our managed services offering. They were not an additional revenue line item. So I know I'm going to get questions about that. How did you know what to charge? Let me put it this way. We removed senior engineering talent. Let's say, if I had to guesstimate, I'm not going to have this perfect, but I had 6 senior engineers that were doing work that I no longer needed to do. So they knew that they had to either skill up or shift what they were going to be doing to deliver value to the clients, or I was going to help them find, the next career for them somewhere else. And I'd say about half of them very successfully made that transition. There was a lot of strength around business intelligence and dashboarding, some interest in Azure AD security and mobile device management, and then I already had strengths in VCIO. So we retained those and we hired other people. When we reduced the cost of those senior engineering staff, we replaced those costs with people delivering these services. That's how we maintained our revenue and retained healthy, but not exorbitant margins, while delivering not just infrastructure vendor services, but true business value services into our clients, and allowed us to maintain, I don't know what everybody here charges, we were averaging about $150 to $165 per user per month for managed services. We had some clients up in the high 200s. The slowest ones were maybe 120. And we didn't want to reduce our revenue. We had a strong top line, and we wanted to maintain our revenue and maintain our margins. So this is how we stayed sticky with those types of clients and avoided becoming commoditized, was identifying this. I think that, and I fully believe that, there's ways to find what that is. And I think that I think the answer is different for every client. So I tried to generalize and give some lists, but I think there's 2 ways to find it. Number one is look inside, right? What are you, if you're the leader of your company, what are you particularly talented at, where you could, if you had the time that you weren't running your IT services business and you were to walk into the leader of another business and not just focus on infrastructure, but literally look at their business and deliver value, where could you do that? What's your talent level? Or in a slightly larger company, your senior talent. Where's your senior talent? What can they deliver? Is it business intelligence? So that's a great place to look. What are your internal skills? That's what I do with my new platform as we start to look at that. Secondarily, look at your client base. Is there a consistent need that isn't being met beyond IT infrastructure that you believe you could adjust to and begin to meet for them? And that's where I get into the vertical application management, jumping into a vertical, dashboard creation. Maybe you're in a legal vertical and you could jump on a specific cloud SaaS play that would span that vertical and just become an absolute expert where you avoided competition because you were so unique in that value proposition. So that's what I'm talking about in the second piece, is really figuring out how to add value and moving forward. So what are the action items? I think the very first and most important thing, like I said, this doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey. It takes time. My warning is you need to make the decision to shift. Or, like Harry said before, you're making the decision to go fishing. This is here. It's here to stay. If you don't have people who are highly proficient at the future of cloud-based direct, identity management, start educating them or educating yourself, because that's the future of where this is going. People want to authenticate centrally without premise-based infrastructure. So that leads us to 2. Learn it. Azure AD, that's where I start. There are folks there are people out here who maybe do 100% Google. That's great. They have their own type of directory services. It's not, and there are actually other third-party directory services providers in the more enterprise environment. Learn them. Get very, very good at assessments and migrations, because when you sell, once you know Azure AD, where you start to sell is we're going to assess, we're going to migrate, and then we're going to manage you in a cloud infrastructure, not a traditional premise-based infrastructure. Don't start with traditional and move. Sell the end game. Sell the goal. Plan your client migration. Start with the easy stuff, the clients who are begging or the super easy clients, and then move into the harder ones later. Get really good at this on the low-risk clients. And of course, eat your own dog food. We started with ourselves. We were the first partner to migrate ConnectWise and LabTech into Azure, and there's actually a Microsoft white paper out there floating around because I was so adamant with my staff that I wanted it gone. And so we had to do a VM because it wasn't a SaaS product yet. We understand that happens. Great. If there's something that can't move to SaaS, then infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, we'd utilize Azure temporarily for those needs. But that will come to an end. The SaaS platforms are coming. And then finally, find your business value add. Look at the skills of your staff, look at the needs of your clients, and make it happen. It's a journey. You can start thinking about number 4 without having to actually do it today, because you've got a lot of work to get through 2 and 3. And it can come definitely in shifts and iterations. But that's the message, and I hope that was helpful in education. I'm excited to take questions, and Harry, hopefully I hit pretty close to, I think, what I saw on the agenda from a time perspective. So hopefully you hit it on the head.
Yeah, no, you're a natural, dude. You're good. So I like it. Hey, by the way, let's get on each other's calendars when I'm down at Continuum in Vegas in about 10 days.
Perfect.
Okay, it's been too long.
Absolutely.
We do have some questions, so I'm going to take one of them. Guys, I'm going to take them a little bit out of order. We've got Bill, David, George, Cullum. Let me hit George's real quick. Just came in, and Jamison, please speak up. But he's asking, where's the best place where I can get trained on these technologies? And George, I want to offer, our training partner is SQLsoft 3. Numeric 3, so SQLsoft3.com, and one of our speakers in a couple of weeks is the CEO of SQLsoft 3. And Jamison, you may remember back when Knights were bold and Kings owned all the gold in the 90s and 2000s, and we had a pretty thriving training community here in Seattle, the CTACs.
Yep.
And SQLsoft, there was SQLsoft, there was Eris, there was US Connect. Don't know if you were in that crowd, Jamison, but SQLsoft was a player, brother.
Yeah.
And I'd like to give a shout out to them. So, folks, if you're looking for some training resources, click on over to SQLsoft 3. Let them know SMB Nation sent you. Jamison, if you'd like to answer that question on some resources you're aware of.
Yeah, I would say, I'd more or less echo what you said. What I'd also say is it's always changing. The sands are shifting at Microsoft all the time. The people who are doing a lot of the partner education work, that team's kind of come and gone and shifted a lot. However, their resources on the Azure side, their training, just like they've moved their applications from the traditional, you could get a poster. You remember this, Harry, back in the day. I knew 5 years beforehand what features were coming in the next version of SQL. Those days are over, right? So we often find a new feature in Office 365 that came out before our partner account manager does, because it's weekly, which is great. But this has also forced them to do some pretty interesting things from documentation perspective. We were able to get a lot further around this Azure stuff through just online stuff at Microsoft than we could in previous iterations of the products. SharePoint, for example, always had horrible documentation online. It's gotten decidedly better, so we started there, and then certainly when we got into the higher level education, we'd move off into the SQLsofts and stuff like that to get certified.
That's right.
Get more specific stuff.
Fair enough. Quickly, Colum is, oh boy, got to get some water. Colum is saying, thank you for the excellent content. Dana is saying, Jamison, can you go back to that last slide instead of the question slide? Please go back one so he can the gentleman can reflect on that. We have finally back up to Bill Holt. So Bill goes on to ask, even if you move clients to 100% cloud infrastructure, you still have endpoints that require support. This presentation seems to ignore that side. There will be security concerns on endpoints. How do you recommend handling a 3-user on-prem QuickBooks in a cloud model? The cloud QuickBooks is insufficient, and I'll just interject, amen, brother. We use the cloud QuickBooks. It's okay.
So I heard about 3 questions in there. I heard so endpoints and premise-based requirements for endpoints. Yeah, so it's not that I'm ignoring it. I want to be really clear. I just don't have. I could go on in this content and talk for hours. And I've done a fair amount of consulting on this content. And it's usually an 8-hour session to just kind of walk through all of it. So I tried to jam a lot in a short period. In our managed services, even when we went 100% cloud solution provider, we absolutely still had occasional client visits. We were still doing endpoints. Oftentimes we were doing procurement and implementation along with desktop support. Now the requirement for the on-site was dramatically reduced when we had virtually no premise-based infrastructure, no servers, far more reliable switches and firewalls, and frankly, endpoints, we were doing almost entirely Surface devices. We never touched them. We had clients who, Microsoft now started, I didn't really touch on hardware as a service. If you're a Microsoft CSP, you can now do Surface as a service. We see a lot of MSPs doing that, just saying, you get a laptop, a tablet, or the Surface Book for a convertible, and I had clients with 40 or 50 staff who were like, good enough, just get us 50 of them. And if I couldn't get on-premise, they had other ways to tackle them. In terms of security, we did use, when you get EMS with all the enhanced pieces of the cloud, Microsoft does deliver a very robust security suite. We did utilize that. However, we also still used a third-party managed security product, and we absolutely managed it across devices. However, what we layered in that we were never doing before is all the mobile device management, iPhones, iPads, Android. We were able to do all of that security, authentication, everything from Azure AD and Intune. So we were layering vastly more support. The last question was about QuickBooks, so let me tackle that real briefly. I didn't spend time here.
And Jamison, if you don't mind, let me clarify. I didn't see the line split. The question on QuickBooks is from David Anderson, so it is a separate question, but please take it on.
So it's kind of a 2-part question. So there's a specific to QuickBooks question, but there's also the larger question of premise-based line of business applications. So first thing I'll say is, while we still see QuickBooks, and there still are line of business, premise-based line of business applications, if you look at the trajectory of the death of those applications, it's jaw-dropping. It may not be here 100% today for every application your client uses, but in 3 years, it's over. Intuit knows it, or not now, QuickBooks, sorry, but QuickBooks knows it, and frankly, I'm not on my new company. I chose Xero as my accounting platform because I needed a pure-based SaaS platform. I have a lot of clients who use the cloud-based QuickBooks, and it was completely inadequate a year ago. However, I have a lot of clients over the last 2 months with their latest iterations of features say they're comfortably replacing QuickBooks Pro easily with no problem, but they're not quite there with QuickBooks Enterprise. So it depends on the features you use. But everybody recognizes this is coming. I'll make another example. We had a lot of clients on Great Plains, Dynamics GP, and we were going pure cloud. We said we're not going to buy infrastructure for this. We know it's moving to SaaS. So we built out VMs in Azure, so it would tie to Azure AD, and we would have to still run a VM running true premise-based AD because Dynamics GP required that, but it was running it in Azure on a VM, a very cheap VM, and then the VMs that were required for Dynamics. But the goal was that was a short-term solution. So what did Microsoft do? They took AX, Navision, and GP. They'd moved 2 of them to the cloud, and they killed the 3rd one. It's everybody. You can look anywhere, and this world's changing. You, Harry, you recognize the name Practice Partner? Very big EMR out of Seattle. They sold to McKesson. They had a huge amount of clients. They're all premise-based electronic medical records. They didn't transition fast enough to SaaS. They had no trajectory towards SaaS. So eClinicalWorks and EMDs ate their lunch and they went out of business. The stories just go on and on and on. Big, fat line of business apps that require a server, they're gone. QuickBooks included. Maybe not today, but tomorrow.
Yep.
So it's a temporary problem.
Yeah, but closely related, if you don't mind, Bill Barnes out of, I believe he's over in Boise, is to ask closely related. Let me get this straight. If Great Plains is a cloud-based service, is Great Plains a cloud-based service? If so, what about migrating a very old version of Great Plains? Closely related.
I can answer that one. So Great Plains is not a cloud-based service. It's premise-based only, and it's the one they killed. There's no future version of Great Plains. They've announced the death of Great Plains. So the answer, the most streamlined, everybody's trying to tackle that market right now. Microsoft's far larger, 10x larger revenue product that served the mid-market, although we heard less about it in the States because it was mostly international, is Navision. Navision is now Dynamics 365 for business, which is the mid-market product, and then AX moved into Dynamics 365 Enterprise. So they're both called Dynamics 365. AX and Navision moved to the cloud. Great Plains dead. So what we're seeing I worked with a lot of consultants who did Great Plains GP work, and they're migrating people to the cloud-based version of Navision, which is called Dynamics 365 for business. There's your answer. So it's moving from premise to cloud, but you've actually got to move off that application because it died, because they didn't have a cloud trajectory for it.
Okay. Let's see. Folks, if you have more questions, I have a couple more questions, but if you have any more, please queue them up. We got about 6 minutes left. How do you manage the amount of time and effort you include for these services for any particular client? So, Jamison, managing time as an MSP in this world.
Sorry, I was taking a drink of water. I think what we're talking about there is the value-add services. How do you manage that? So it's tricky. When we did premise-based senior engineer services, we would just look in a distributed fashion. What is this set of services costing us? Not everybody does a great job perfectly allocating all their senior engineering to specific clients. Oftentimes it can't be because it's more central service. And we just allocated and said everybody's requiring kind of the same stuff. So what this requires when you start changing these more discrete business value-add services, which are frankly unlikely to be centralized, there's nuance or specific things that you're going to be doing for specific clients, is you've got to measure the time. And you're going to lose 1 month and gain the next. So we had a monthly report where we looked at what was our actual hourly rate for each client for that month. And we knew if it was low, we could drill in and see what were the services we were delivering that reduced our margins on that particular client. So it was very important to be looking at that continuously. And if we repeatedly had clients that we saw low margin, then we were over-delivering, we'd either have to tailor it back or talk to the client. Maybe there was opportunity for more revenue, but we just wouldn't proceed at that level. So business intelligence, for example, that was an easy one because you give a business owner some really great dashboarding and BI and they can't let it go. We would go in and find some line of business app or something that they were getting horrible reporting on, and we'd build a quick, simple Power BI dashboard and put it on their iPhone. And say, look at this. You can put it on big screen if you want. And they're like, oh my God, give me more. And then we'd figure out a project that we knew we could execute over 6 months and a certain amount of hours a month and just say, we'll just build it into your plan. It's just part of what we can deliver. And we just eke it out at a pace that allowed us to say to the customer, you know, we're going to be able to we'll do a few hours of this a month. If you need to accelerate it or do something really out of whack, then great. Now we've moved into really delivering more revenue around that line of business. But our goal was to maintain those minimal, the revenues we were already making in our core managed services offering.
Yeah. Next question. Raj is asking, What about Dynamics Financials? And he clarifies Dynamics 365 Financials. What do you know about that SKU? Jamison, I'm not skilled in that.
I'm trying to remember. If I'm not mistaken, Dynamics 365 Financials is the separate SKU from the enterprise set of SKUs. So Dynamics 365 Financials is the Navision port and the mid-market SKU, SMB mid-market SKU. They're targeting QuickBooks Enterprise, they're targeting Great Navision, and they're targeting Great Plains. So those are the three products they're targeting with that SKU. And then the other ones that are more discrete, they sucked up CRM, right? Dynamics CRM Online. They took that and made that part of Dynamics 365, and then they built out some other pieces that are all the AX enterprise pieces, which are vastly more expensive, right? So the financials is a lower cost SKU that meets the mid-market needs.
Okay, cool. Folks, last call for questions. We've got time for one or two more. I have one more in the queue, and I'm even going to try to answer it, Jamison, then I'll let you answer it. And the question is, what size business do you think is ready for this kind of conversation about pure cloud? And here's my answer is, I had this conversation last night at the Smartsheet conference party at the Chihuly Museum at the Seattle Center. You know how it is, Jamison, you go to a conference, you're having fun, everybody's talking too much, we talk too late into the night, and I really feel strongly, in the absence of myself doing a deal where I'm backed by venture capitalists or private equity where I have to have an office, SMB Nation's lease expired a few years ago, Jamison. I've never been happier, right? Jenny's working from home, and I'm working from a home office and on the road, and so I say you can talk to a very small business about cloud-based computing because of the nature of work changing to mobility and remote. That may not be the answer the gentleman's looking for, but Jamison, the question was, what size business to take up to pure cloud?
Well, we saw virtually no obstacles up to, you're going to have to layer in complexity in the type of business they're in. If it's a massive architecture firm that has all AutoCAD with some crazy premise-based, there's going to be more challenges there at a smaller size, but you could go to a consulting company of 400 and go all cloud overnight. So the size is going to matter a little bit, but we rarely saw barriers to bring virtually everything in the cloud. Up to 100 staff was instant no-brainer. We didn't even think about it at 100 staff. So that example I gave was 150 staff, 5 different offices on the other side of the country, and we did it in 2 months. So we see some core infrastructure there's some things that start to happen between line of business applications and these older companies that have been around that are upper mid-market that start to become a vastly different level of challenge. So it just takes longer, but it's also coming very quickly because the applications they've relied on, like Great Plains, they're having to do massive cloud-based migrations for these applications anyway. So it's coming one way or another. It's just a matter of whether or not you're part of it. We don't really see a limit, virtual limit.
Well, we're going to make that the final word. We're at time, and we're going to say size does not matter. Jamison, we always have to have a little bit of fun. Hey, thank you very much. And Jamison, I believe you're joining us for another lecture in fall semester. Is that maybe 2 seconds on what is the other lecture?
Yeah, just real briefly, again, I mentioned I now a software as a service business that's focused on human capital. So it does kind of dovetail a little bit with this in terms of understanding what the skills are of your staff as you pivot in your organization, whether it's specific to what we're talking about here or otherwise, alignment of people, getting the right people in the right roles, understanding kind of where they're going from a career trajectory perspective. So anybody who's thinking strategically about human capital would be interested in looking at this. We'll be talking about it at a high level, not really about the product that I have, but kind of about why these are important things to consider.
Okay, and let's take you out with a URL. Where can people click over to your latest venture, my friend, and we'll call it a day?
www.teamatics.com. Teamatics. Teamatics. I'll just go back to the about slide.
Teamatics. Yeah, please do. And folks, thanks for joining us for the second lecture in fall semester. So we seem to have struck a knowledge nugget with this audience. Have a great day. Tomorrow's noon Pacific, the third quarter analyst report. So we'll see you there. Jamison, have a great day. Jenny, thanks for your help as always. Folks, we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.